Everybody, it's John Wolpert here with the Baseline Show. We have an all-new show today with our special guests, Mark Meyer and James Zenas, who are going to talk about their company, Crowdz, and supply chain finance and what that means in terms of baselining. We will find out. We have Andreas Freund, head of our standards team, and a new member of the technical steering committee. We have Boris Breslov, who's maybe can tell us some more about his work on the zero knowledge circuits. We have Anant Natarajan, and he's got some pretty interesting stuff going on in NFTs. Dale Foster is joining us. And of course, Sonal Patel, our chief organizer of the community. It's good to see everybody here. First, we should say that we just had our project governance board meeting, and the standard that we've been working on got approved as a release, and there will be further editing and work going on to get it ready for what we call a draft standard that will then get submitted to the OASIS board. So that work is ongoing, and this was an important milestone, although it's not the finish line. I don't think in standards there ever is a finish line. But congratulations, everybody. It was well received, and the notes that we're receiving are reasonably superficial. Sonal, can you tell us about the BLIPs and what we've been doing with projects? I've been really excited about these live coding sessions that have been popping up since you came aboard and started organizing things.
Yeah, so we have 9 baseline improvement proposals in the queue. And our group of core devs and technical steering committee members working through these. And hopefully we'll have some work to present to the group for our December 8th show. But as John mentioned, we've been having just constant working sessions with all the developers, stakeholders, anybody interested in the direction baseline's going. So they're working on that battleship project. They're kind of wireframing what the front end, back end, and circuits will look like, and more people are joining that group by the day that are interested in bringing their skills. We've also had the test suite group have some working sessions where they're doing a monolithic approach to the baseline stack to really dig into it and act like someone who has never seen baseline and how they would consider the components. So John, you were in that working session and you had really good comments from that. What was that like?
Yeah, I thought that was awesome. I mean, first of all, it was great to have all these new developers looking with fresh eyes at the specification and what is needed to be done without any preconceptions about which stack or which thing or which technology to use. And they just started writing code. They just write from, line one. And they did a round robin where they, for I think 15 or 20 minutes, developer number 1 got to have their fingers on the keyboards, and then they switched, and developer number 2, et cetera. And it was great. I like a good pair programming session, but rarely do you get to see a quad pair programming session. So that was kind of cool, and it really helped because people we saw where people got confused. There was a section in the repo in our core in the core stack that that took them down a bit of a rabbit hole around org registry. They're like, well, do we need to really do this for a localhost thing, or is that superfluous, or do I need it? So you could see right there something that was obvious to the framers was not obvious to a new group of people. And it's that kind of stuff that we just need to smash out, right? Like whack-a-mole. We just got to whack all that stuff out. And so that, I think they're paving the way for a real advance in adoption and use by developers, because Developers vote with their feet, and when they get confused about anything, they're off, they're gone. So this is a really, really important phase that we're going through, and I'm really grateful to the folks that are doing it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And a few blips came out of that session, which is very representative of the purpose of baseline improvement proposals. If there's anything anybody's ever confused about or doesn't understand, we want that in our repo so we can make sure that we're addressing it, because that means other people have the same concerns. So that was a really good outcome of that, and I hope that continues happening. And we also had some sessions on blip number 1 related to use cases, possible use cases where zero knowledge wouldn't be needed. John, if you want to give your comments on how that session was today.
Yeah, I think our SAP TSC member, as Mehran Shekri, is just really providing a lot of value right now, saying, you know, look, we at SAP, we deal with all sorts of use cases. Here, what are the ones that don't require baselining? What are baseline adjacent? Maybe, right? So, for example, the Radish 34 project we did 2.5 years ago with EY, you could argue does not require baseline in retrospect today. Yeah, you could probably do it with digital signatures, and that's it, right? Assuming that you know who you're dealing with and you are going to spend the effort and time to create a bespoke integration with the other party, and it's fine. But so the question is, do we want baseline to be more of a general, more expansive? Do we want to really go back to the drawing board and relitigate and say, well, baselining should be about all kinds of multi-party workflow standards? Maybe. I wouldn't say no to that conversation as one of the chairs. It's always a worthy conversation to have. Or is baselining specifically coordination under zero knowledge, where more, 2 or more parties have to prove that they have the same information and attributes of that information without supplying the actual information? If that's baselining, then the use cases that require some kind of resolvable, discoverable public location for the proof, and that you want to be very, very sure that nobody could have messed around with the proof, that the proof is out of the control of any of the counterparties to have tampered with, colluded to a tamper. If that's baselining, then we've got pretty much the right specification for that, because it's written more or less that way. It requires zero knowledge, it requires a CCSM and that sort of thing. And in that case, we want really good use cases, and as you know, Mehran's got some that cannot be solved any other way, and that really make the point for baselining, or can't be solved any other way elegantly. And so that was sort of the conversation we had. I thought it was very fruitful. And I think so now Mehran is going to articulate what one of the use cases he was presenting. He's going to present that to the TSC and to probably bring him on the show and have him talk about it as well. And then we'll go from there and say, well, does this use case, or this kind of extensible use case, really sum it up for us, and how many more can we make? And that'll help solutions providers and other clients, or their clients, say, yeah, okay, well, I see myself in this use case, and I can see how the standard will help me. Yeah, I thought it was a really good meeting.
Yes, me too. And we also had a session this week, another session on the Excel examples that are being created right now. So baselining Excel. And we hope to have that work ready to present to you for our December 8th show as well. But pretty much we have a lot of developers and other people in the community working and joining together in groups, working on a ton of different initiatives, including our outreach teams, our sponsorship team who's working on what a get baseline section on our website would look like, and how we can start incorporating our sponsors to start getting clients baseline. So we just have a lot of moving parts right now, and I'm super excited to put a few bows on things and present them to you all at the end of the year. But that's all that I have for now.
Well, that outreach team must be doing their job, because I was on a call yesterday with for the tree trunk project that we're working on, which is about NFTs, completely outside of enterprise baselining and multi-party workflows and all that stuff. And I was talking about how we were approaching the NFT problem under zero knowledge. And this guy is an artist, right? Not artist, collector, gallery person. And he says, are you using baselining for this? Out of the blue. Like I never said anything about it. He's like, and he didn't know me. Yeah, I met him on an NFT.
Were you wearing your
channel.
hat?
I was not wearing my hat. And he's like, I don't know, maybe he was, maybe he's being nice to me, but I don't think so. He's like, and I'm like, how did you know about baseline? He's like, oh, I've been really getting into the whole, zero knowledge thing. And I ran across baseline and sounds like that. And I was blown away. I'm like, that's an odd place to have something like this come back at you. So people must be hearing about it. I've actually had a couple of conversations similar to that where people I didn't expect to know what baseline was had been learning about it. So it must be getting out there, which is a good segue, I think, to Mark and James. So Mark and James, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, but I'll just say I ran across Crowdz while I was doing my research on supply chain. And you guys look a lot like what I originally wanted to do with our company that's spinning out called Enbridge. And I got excited about you had a really authentic story about why you're in the space and what you're doing to help suppliers weather the vicissitudes of and the horrors of getting paid too damn slow. Let's put it that way. So maybe you can tell us your story.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll start and introduce myself. So my name is Mark Meyer. I'm a French speaker, but I'm Swiss, and I live in London, where I'm based since 2009. I joined Crowdz 10 months ago, and yeah, that's my background is in financial services, particularly in payments, where I actually in Crowdz I manage and I build the payment infrastructure for the company. So James, you wanted to introduce, and maybe you can speak about Crowdz.
Absolutely. Great to meet everyone. Thanks for having us, John. So my name's James Kazanis, currently based in New York, originating from Perth, Western Australia. I spent 11 or 12 years with National Australia Bank, predominantly on foreign exchange and corporate finance. Joined Crowdz. I've actually been speaking to Crowdz for over a year. I'd established a fund with some partners back in Sydney, Australia, and we ran into the Crowdz guys through a program that Techstars was running, and they instantly caught our attention because of their focus on the SME market and also the people in the company. They're just a great bunch of guys. So I joined them officially about 3 months ago in a business development role based out of New York, and helping them with a bunch of things. So yeah, great to be here, and very happy to be part of the company.
So yeah, maybe we can describe a bit what we do. We are what we call an invoice financing organization. So what it means, I mean, you probably know, everybody knows what it is, but just in case, what we offer is a marketplace where we put together SMEs who can actually post their invoice, and funders who can buy the invoices at discounts. Because in this world, 50% of the SMEs struggle with cash flow, and it's a good way to get working capital. What we see in the industry, on the invoice factoring industry, particularly from large organizations, the APRs, these type of SMEs are experiencing are just outrageous. And our goal is really to help them to get better APRs, and also to get their money quicker, because when you deal with a bank, not necessarily, if you're small, they don't really care about you. I shouldn't say that because I used to work for a bank, but they usually work for, I would say, larger organizations. Going after the large market is probably more expensive, and also they charge quite a lot. In addition to that, in terms of technology, you have, speaking about the UK in particular, now you have like technology like faster payments, open banking, that have been that could be implemented. There's not there yet, but could really help to address this type of industry. But this is who we are. Our big project is with Facebook, so or Meta now. So what we're doing with them is Facebook has 100 million they would like to distribute buying invoices for minority businesses to help them to rebound after the crisis. And we build a white label for them to target not only the suppliers, but also other minority businesses. And so far, we funded about 35 million, if I'm correct, both with Facebook to
So
this
how does that
minority
work,
businesses.
Mark? That's interesting, by the way. So you're working with Facebook on this, and the effect of it is that businesses that are selling to Facebook are getting paid immediately upon completion of their invoice. So they submit their invoice. There's a confirmation. There's some short period of time where they get a confirmation of acceptance of the invoice, and then you pay them immediately, as opposed to, say, net 30, 90, or what have you.
Yeah, correct. Yes,
And then
that's
Facebook
exactly
pays you later.
So now what it works is it's term of fees, and but yeah, in essence, it's what you mentioned. The sellers upload the invoices. Obviously, we do the KYC, KYB. We check the invoice. So we have a risk scoring mechanism called the SURF score. That stands for sustainability. James, help me. I will forget.
Sustainability, risk, and financial score.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it incorporates a bunch of different data points. Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
We get several data points, and we put a risk scoring that is an average on the buyer and the seller.
Buyer
and basically they are. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just the buyer. You're not just scoring the buyer. You're actually scoring the seller as well, even though the seller is the one that's getting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Because the risk could be because at the moment we evolving the payment infrastructure, but at the moment you can imagine that the seller can sit on their money and say I've never been paid because it's probably where we come to baseline after that, but there is no standard in information shared. So this world, for example, if you're a bank, I usually pick up the phone, call the buyer, and ask, is this invoice legit? Have you paid or not? You never know who has paid or not in this environment. There are several models. We use what we call a non-recourse model. So basically, we deal with the seller and not with the buyer. Slightly different with Facebook. There are some caveats, but
does that reduce the requirement on? If I don't mean interrupting.
Yeah.
Does that reduce the requirement on contracting with the buyer? In other words, the buyer having to, there's some states have disclosure rules that the buyer has to, physically sign off on you buying the invoice from the supplier. Yeah. But as I was getting into the legal on this, and we did, Andreas and I and Professor Jimmy Lentz from Duke University and a bunch of folks that are now on the Enbridge team, and a wonderful, sharp intern from Georgetown, Lauren Gibson. Shout out to Lauren Gibson. Really, who was very oddly well experienced in collections. We're looking into this and saw that if you're on a non-recourse basis, that requirement is a little different. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But what we found interestingly, and maybe James, so you can add into that. But with SMEs, most of our customers, they do not want to let the buyer know that actually they sold the invoice. There is some tricky part here. It's probably different. It's different in large organizations, but the SMEs do not want this information to be shared with the buyer and to say, "Oh, I am in need of working capital," basically.
Yeah, it's a funny one, John. Information is a powerful thing in supply chains. Sometimes people would rather keep their private information private and just expose what they want to expose at the time they feel it's necessary. And actually, going back to your question on the Facebook program, there's a few different ways we run, but with Facebook in particular, we're running a model where they're actually funding the invoices themselves. So it's really cool to see. But Facebook, as you can imagine, or Meta, as we should call them, are sitting on, endless capital that they'd probably like to be putting to work, given where interest rates are at the moment for deposits. So they think, hey, we can put some capital to work, but also do something really good for our diverse suppliers. So, and it's just a really cool program.
Let's talk about that. I mean, a person that, and Andreas might have some thoughts on this as well, I bet. A person that is coming new to this would say, wait a minute,
Yeah.
Facebook already has the money. Why don't they just pay the supplier immediately? Why do they need you? Right.
Okay. Yeah, very, very good question. So one of the interesting distinctions is some of the invoices being sold to Facebook aren't invoices that Facebook owes. So it might be a supplier that's worked with Facebook in the last couple of years. That same supplier has now got invoices that are owed by Google, Apple, and other companies out there. And they've gone, hey, Facebook, we've got a relationship. We've been working together. I've just done a bunch of work with Google. What do you think of this invoice? Like, in essence, that's what's happening. And Facebook are like, you're an SME. We want to support our SMEs. We've got some capital, and we're going to offer very attractive financing rates, 1%, to get that invoice fulfilled.
Wait, so you're saying this is cool. So Facebook, with you guys, is putting up a fund to say, if you've been a vendor of ours, we love you, and we'll back the financing of your invoice, no matter who's you're buying.
Well, this is the thing. There's definitely some eligibility criteria, of course,
assuming the buyer tends to pay.
Yeah. And this is where our surf score, we leverage our proprietary risk model to make sure that both the seller and the buyer are being appropriately risk scored, and subject to what that produces. Facebook will make a decision among a few other hurdles that they've set up as well. So it's kind of a really interesting program, and they've gone really heavy into the program. We kicked off with the guys at the start of this year, Mark, if I'm not mistaken, and we have been extended to go forward with that in 2022. They're really committing to this. They're very passionate about the SME kind of customer base, and they want to make sure that they're well supported with funding. So
that's awesome.
and to be fair with to Meta, is the people we've been dealing with genuinely really wants to help the minority businesses. So just not to discuss too much, but Facebook is doing that on not from a perspective of making money. Basically, it's really to help the communities in the US
to their
potentially broader in the future.
Yeah. And shout out to Jason from Facebook. He's been a key person for us in that company. So I think I saw some media news pop up on our Slack, Mark, that Sheryl Sandberg's interviewing him about the program. So with Sheryl behind it as well, being a big name and having kind of Mark's right hand, Mark's ear, there's a good pressure on Crowdz to deliver, and we have been delivering to date. It's been an awesome experience to see and experience.
That's wonderful. I think that shout out to Sheryl Sandberg, and given your support for that, you would be allowed to be part of the baseline community if you wanted.
Thank you. Appreciate
we
that.
accept you as a fellow soul. We love that. Andreas, you had a question?
So what type of data is Facebook? Let's call it Facebook. Let's call it spade a spade. And the asking from their suppliers to give them of their buyers, right? Of the supplier's buyer, what information in order to do the scoring, or you do the scoring. What do you require to do the scoring? So in other words, how much does the buyer have to trust, or let's say, how much does the buyer know that the supplier turns over data of theirs to you?
Yeah,
do you want me to kind of feed into that?
I can go from a data perspective. So what we do is we go to credit rating agency to get the credit score of the companies. We had information if the company is publicly listed, which is really rare as well. We get their information about their ratings, if it's a AAA, some sort of information. Also, the list that we get from Facebook has been created in terms of reducing the risk profile of these companies. What else? James, do you know if we collect further information?
We also, Andreas, we also collect, I mean, this is typically a really great scenario for us, but the seller of invoices will be connecting their accounting software. We've got integrations with Xero, MyOb, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really powerful mechanism for our scoring, because once they feed that kind of financial history into our scoring system, we can kind of determine a number of things with that data set, cross-referencing the public available data from those scoring agencies like Dun & Bradstreet, and we can determine what we feel is an appropriate surf score. We do the same on, we score the buyers as well, although it's a little bit different in that scoring methodology. And to answer your question directly, the data is actually owned by Crowdz. We collect the data, and the buyers don't know what data we're collecting on the sellers, and vice versa. They're separate. But internally, we kind of leverage our own scoring, combine them, and determine the probability of a seller paying us back. Because that's it. That's a really interesting thing about invoice finance and trade finance as a whole. It can get quite complex. You've got a seller, a buyer, and a funder. So if the funder's looking at it going, well, we need the buyer to pay back the seller, who then needs to pay back the funder. So this is why we actually risk score both parties to make sure we're covering different angles. And you know, it's on
top of that, we build the model. Basically, you have machine learning running on the back of it, based on historical. We start to have like quite few data that actually help to build the model, and the model is becoming more accurate as well.
Yeah,
but it doesn't work with new customers, obviously.
So you are actually getting AR module data about days outstanding, you know, payment history on the buyer, right?
On the seller, we're getting that because they're the ones that are connecting their accounting software. They're the ones selling the invoice. On the buyer, so you can imagine, let's pretend you've got company XYZ selling some invoices. Their customer or their buyer on the invoice is Google. We're getting a lot of publicly available data on Google. And someone might say, hey, Google like a AAA, right? Why would you even need to bother rating them? It's Google. But actually in an SME and Google relationship, sometimes Google, being the enterprise they are, don't actually always pay their small and medium businesses on time. So our surf score might reflect Google out of 100 being maybe like a 90 or a 90, 93. So we're just taking into account the best, well, it's still a developing score, of course, Andreas, but we're just taking into account as much data as we can and making sure we've got robust practices around that internally.
So are you actually taking the payment history of Google from the AR system of the SMB?
I don't believe we are, but I'm happy to stand to be corrected because I don't see.
No, so the reason why I'm asking this, and John knows exactly where this is going.
I know where you're going. Yeah.
Tell me.
Right. So the whole point is, if you had that information, right, all the public information becomes irrelevant. Yeah.
Well, actually, because, you know what?
Because then you know that they have been partners for 3 years, right?
Yeah.
They have been paid on time. They have been paid on time. They might have paid the other guys not on time, but because they had a special relationship, they actually paid them on time.
We actually get it now. I'm thinking about it from the seller accounting software. So we would get that.
Yeah, and
you get that.
And there is also an initiative. We're not there yet, but we want to leverage open banking and cloud in the US because we can actually get this information within the bank accounts. So basically, we can get, I think in Europe, like I'm talking about Europe, you can get up to 3 years of statement information. So you can, one of the risks in this industry is the fact that the invoice is completely fake or the relationship doesn't exist. So you can actually look at the statements and say, oh, okay, 1 year ago or 6 months ago, 3 months ago, these people actually exchange money, so this invoice must be legit. So that's information we can source from the bank account. We could use zero knowledge proof as well to say, if we can just ask the question, do these two persons have a relationship, and just query the bank account and get the information back and say yes or no.
That's really the question, right? I got to get a stinger signal that says, that's cool, but is it baseline? Right.
Yeah.
So
baseline's the evolution of it.
Right. Yeah. So this is a pretty good SaaS business. I really love your founding story. Your founder, 100 years in family business, doing, international trade, and seeing, small companies overseas getting put out of business just because they didn't get paid on time. And I love this story of, especially something that Nick Kritikos talks a lot about is, on Unbridge is deep invoice finance. That is, you go, 3, 4, 5, 6 suppliers of suppliers of suppliers back in the system. And they're at the whipsaw back end of this problem. And they're the ones that are smallest, least able to handle the disruptions and go out of business. And they're the ones that we all rely on because they're providing something basic. So it'd be really great to see, companies like Crowdz deal with that. And in fact, I think, so let's talk about where the baseline problem is in this, right? So again, I'll remind everybody my most succinct way of describing baselining is an emerging standard for coordination under zero knowledge, where you need to prove that you have the same information between counterparties and prove some attribute of that information, like got paid on time. In cases where you cannot disclose or should not, or are really uncomfortable about disclosing the actual information. So, where would that kind of pattern impact you guys going forward? One case that I think we've discussed before is compliance and increasing participation rates of suppliers and buyers who don't really like giving up the actual data. Yeah.
And I think I would add as well, in Europe, you have GDPR rules that actually really more stringent than I think in the US. So
the more you collect, the more you're at risk, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can get, you supposedly you're not supposed to share any information or know any information without the consent of the party involved. But I think
best if you never had that information, right? Hey, we never had it.
Exactly.
We've got this hash here that says that we can believe we have an attestation that they've got what we need, but we don't have the data. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
No, exactly. Where we see a baseline, as we discussed the other day, is probably, the weak point is the relationship between the buyer and the seller. So if we can standardize this, because they all have different systems, different protocols, different business logic. And we need this information. We need to know that this invoice has been sold. We need to know if the invoice has not been duplicated, or if it has been already repaid, if they have the relationship and so on and so forth. So if we can standardize to start with this relationship, they will be great, because we can then make sure that everything is automatic. We know that this invoice is legit. We know, everything becomes, we reduce the impact will be we reduce the risk involved, and obviously we reduce the discount rate that applies to the seller, and eventually you get lower working capital on the market, and SMEs can thrive. That's, I think, the ultimate goal, because the information helps to streamline, baseline everything onto the ecosystem. And obviously, James, you have another view on.
No, I think that's bang on. And if we go back to one of the core problems SMEs face in this market, it's, the market's opaque in finance. Nobody knows where they're getting priced at, so therefore they have to exchange their data to get more accurate pricing. But as you say, there's a problem here because some people don't want to disclose that data. They're like, well, history has shown that some organizations, like the aforementioned, so the kind of the big ones like Google maybe haven't done the best things with that data. So what is the solution? We need information to make decisions. Companies don't want to give the data, but they're good companies. How do we prove it? And this is where using a hash and baselining can probably help. which is what has gotten us really excited. It allows us to kind of get that information and go, no, they've got it. It's proven through this hash, and we now have what we need to kind of get them onboarded into the system and start giving them a marketplace to sell their invoices into.
Well, that buyer supplier thing that you mentioned is why it's so important to have companies like SAP and Microsoft. And I had a remarkably encouraging conversation with Oracle the other day. So maybe that there's something there as well. Where and Facebook or Salesforce and other ERP CRM systems. That's why we spent so much effort on the standard, because companies like that, CIOs, they need that standard to be able to say, yeah, we're going to implement something in a common way that we can feel comfortable with, because we have this 80-page document that we can, after our eyes stop bleeding, we'll feel comfortable having read. So I think that's, people are like, why are you doing a standard? Why don't you just write some open source code? And that's a big reason, so that, Crowdz shouldn't have to go convince, all your buyers and suppliers to have to plug in some new stack in order to baseline. It should just be an attribute of the systems they're already running.
Absolutely. I think everything's
another important thing is the banks. So you were talking about Plaid just a minute ago. And I noted that because in a far future, I'm not saying this is happening today, but imagine all of the banks are baselined, right? We've gotten over the idea that banks are going to go away. They're not. They're still, the marginal cost of moving money around in the banking system is close to zero. The marginal cost of running a crypto transaction, not close to zero, right? So, the reason you get charged by banks is because they can. That's probably the biggest impact of cryptocurrency, I think, or one of them is, banks are going to start to say, just like we did with peer-to-peer and telephony when things like Skype came around, we're like, oh yeah, maybe we should stop tariffing long distance phone calls, right? Same thing is going to happen with banks. I'm like, we don't really need to charge them that bank transaction, really. Why don't we just stop charging them, right? So, but it's fairly efficient. Oddly, people say, oh, this is a terrible system. Fairly efficient banking, could be more so, but in a world where banks still exist and still move money around, the bank of the buyer probably would prefer to know from the bank of the supplier directly that you have paid them before they pay you. I mean, you can use your information system to tell them that you did, but that's hearsay, right? Your information system can be lying. But so that's, you can do that with a mess of API calls and Plaid and all, that's why they make money. Or what if there's a world where each of these banks are baselined and they're just dropping proofs on something like Base Ledger, where it's resolvable. I can subscribe to that, and as the buyer's bank, I can go up. I'm polling that location. There's my proof. I'm going to run that through my circuit. I've already got the preempt. Yep, the rules have been met. I'm going to release the money to Crowdz.
Yeah. And it's exactly what you described is the opposition. When I come back again, the opposition, US, Europe. The fact that the regulator in Europe said with PSD2 now you release all of these APIs. That's the bare minimum, but actually they say this is a standard, and you release these APIs for the market, and you get some sort of standardization on the market, and you have all these TPPs now that are fintechs that provide this interface, this buffer between the banks and the market. But in essence, you have this in place possibly. Not necessarily in the US because it's driven by the industry itself, and basically they don't want to open it. Plaid is just screen scraping at the moment, so it's not really stable. I mean, I would say it's not great, but you're absolutely right. There might be an opportunity in the US to potentially go with a baseline solution because the API solution don't exist on this market.
Hey Boris, what do you think of all this? You work for a pretty big bank.
No, I was just going to say, because I worked on a few projects, foreign banks and US banks, on credit counterparty risk. what has occurred after 2008, after the realization, like the S&Ps and the Moody's and all of the agencies that were basically looking at the risk, they were worth nothing, because we pretty much almost collapsed by trusting outside agencies. So each bank basically jumped into it and said, we will create our own risk model, and every bank is doing it today. So something to realize that when we talk about buyer, seller, and the products, I mean, invoicing. I'm not an expert on invoicing. I'll be honest with you, but it is pretty much the same game. That every bank is building their own model, and they look at the. I mean, on the credit counterparty risk, there are some regulatory rules, very strict rules. I mean, how much can you be exposed to a specific party, and based on your capital and things like that, it's like around 20-25%, depends on the size of the bank and the other side you're dealing with.
You know, that Boris, that's where, if I can cut in, that is where I think is really interesting as companies like Crowdz, which is effectively a asset originator, right? Start working with DeFi protocols like and companies like Enbridge. You know, for their funding, those rules now you're dealing with recursively. You're dealing with layer upon layer of information that you really don't want to be exposing to all those different counterparties, but you need to be able to prove that the rules were followed all the way up to Enbridge, so that you can say, yep, Enbridge is not overly exposed, et cetera, et cetera.
So I mean, basically, you need to have, maybe you're doing this already in Crowdz, but you need to have a hierarchy. Basically, if there was a parent and there are children of the counterparties and so on, and what the exposure actually, who is liable, who's going to pay you if something goes wrong, something collapses, like who is? I mean, that's one of the issues we had in 2008, especially with the foreign banks. Like, who owes you the money? It's like if something goes down, like, where's the money if anything of that type. One other thing, John, that you mentioned at the beginning, as far as funds go, and banks are sitting obviously on quite a bit of cash and so on, but no one is eager to pay out. So what they do, one of the things that one of the products, like the repo, I mean, salaries of employees are being paid.
Repos, right?
Repos,
yeah. So,
basically.
For the viewers, let's summarize that. Not everybody knows what a repo is.
Yeah.
It's not like Repo Man the movie, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not. Yeah, it's not. Basically, you take a loan overnight. You give somebody
an overnight loan between institutions.
Overnight loan to pay sometimes often salaries of the employees in the bank, and the bank basically looks at it and say, this is more beneficial to me to do this than just like not sit on the cash that I could use immediately to maybe buy some products. If somebody shows up on the market today, basically it's a, I mean, you look at the risk, you look at what's best for the bank. So invoices obviously could come, get paid at the last minute. Well, obviously, if there is a smaller player, they're just gonna sit on it. You know, it's like, and that's what unfortunately large corporations can do, and it's very challenging to deal with that unless you create a transparency. Maybe a transparency model is the best thing. You know,
I don't love the word transparency.
I think you mentioned it once. Yeah, I mean, just expose
integrity.
Integrity, right? Expose the integrity. Just say, here is who owns actually. Here's actually, this is the parent counterparty. If you have to get the money, that's where you go. You know, or things like that.
I would actually like to come back to the cash flow and the cash balance, because that is really important, because people do not understand how vital this is, and how because and again, you know, also, you know, transparency, or actually no, it's like proof of correctness, right? Because that allows you to so one of the reasons, one of the outcomes out of the Great Recession was that banks must carry more cash on their balance sheet, but also large other corporations as well. It was basically what swayed the Fed was a call by the CEO of GE and saying it's like, we have cash for 72 hours. In 72 hours, we must let 300,000 people go. That would have been the de facto collapse of the U.S. economy at that point. Why? Because they could not get overnight loans to finance their operations. In California, if you cannot make payroll, you must, by law, declare bankruptcy. You must, right? There's in California, if you're an entity incorporated in California, you cannot make payroll. You must declare bankruptcy. So there's you cannot overemphasize the importance of cash balances and how to manage them, and especially for banks, and especially in a global economy, where actually even within banks, right, the different units are not exactly on speaking terms. So there's actually cash management in large global banks. It's a huge problem because it's not well distributed. So it's like you can actually create significant legal issues because one unit doesn't want to share their cash balance with the other, even overnight. And that is really where it comes in. It's like, I don't need to know all your details. Just make it available.
Need to know that you're in compliance.
You're in compliance. That's
right.
Really
yeah. There's your zero. Yeah. I can prove that I'm in compliance, and I'm not going to give you any more data. Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Trust the hash. Trust the
hash. Yeah. That ought to be a bumper sticker.
Yeah, Andreas, this is a very good point, because liquidity risk is huge for banks, and reporting liquidity risk, and when departments, I mean, they have to share. At the end of the day, they need to share it because they have to report the risk, but they often get out of sync. Basically, not right. I mean, they basically they say, okay, we gave you a loan on a bond from one department to another, but then someone doesn't necessarily report it or captures it as expected, and then when you report the risk, it's like your liquidity, you're saying, where is it? Is it here or there, or like, yeah. So that's a very but that's internal to the company. That's why, because I was kind of thinking of baselining, which makes total sense, but yeah, you should be able to deal it with, should be implementable with existing processes and functionality, but it never does. Never is.
I up you one though, even more so. The repos require now 3 parties.
You got these guys talking about repos.
Tri-parties, sure. Tri-parties.
Tri-party.
My fault.
The largest business of State Street is being the holder of the securities that are used as collateral for those overnight repos.
Yeah. Shout out to State Street, of course. They hired a bunch of my teammates from IBM.
It's like they're a publicly traded company. You look in their 10K and 10Q. I'm not disclosing any confidential information. Everybody can see it if they actually look at the quarterly and annual SEC reporting. The interesting thing is that if you baseline, you can get rid of the third party, because you can now lock in collateral. You cannot expose it anymore, right?
Pour skin on that, okay? I'll like to see a solution for that next week. Going back over to James and Mark.
Yes.
We are about close to the top of the hour. I do want to say we're grateful for your time on the show. We want to do a lot. Sonal and I have been talking a lot about how to really get into real business situations, and explore them with people that know what they're talking about. You guys really do. Really admire the work you guys are doing. Again, an old investor from years ago of mine said to me once that we don't invest in people that are in love with the solution. we invest in people who have an authentic story about why they're going to solve a problem. And you guys have a really good authentic story, and you seem like you're in it to win it. And I just like the don't make me regret this statement, but it seems like you're a pretty good company. So I worked for a guy that once said that Enron was the most innovative company of the year that he probably shouldn't have said that. So I'm careful about my statements, but it was an innovative company. Creative accounting is maybe not a thing you want to do.
Quite a skill.
Yeah. Hey, Ananth, we're running out of time, but I wonder if you have some thoughts. I know you're in the business of these organizational, collaborations. And do you see an angle on that with regard to supply chain finance? I mean, in these complex projects that you're trying to help organize?
Yes, John. So project finance is, I think there's broad similarities, right? I mean, so basically, if you look at the dragon behind me, right, that's in the shape of a project S-curve. The project S-curve, it's basically a cumulative, curve, right? Well, it can represent a lot of things in a project. It can represent the number of hours that have been worked. It can represent.
You probably deal with surety bonds a lot, right?
I'm sorry?
You're probably dealing a lot more with surety bonds and that sort of instrument as well, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, here is the issue with big projects, right? I mean, especially the ones that are hundreds of millions of dollars, go for several years and so on. You have a network of suppliers, right? So the S-curve can also represent the project spending. You take any company across a contractual chain, their expenses can be plotted as an S-curve. You started off small, then it goes up pretty fast, then it tapers off. That's pretty much what it represents. So if you take a contractor or a subcontractor, how are you going to fund your, work, right? It comes back to, finance again, right? I mean, it goes back to how are you going to fund your operations while you're working on this project? You're not going to wait to get funded, when it's over 2 or 5 years from now, right? So you do two things. One is you do have approached banks, for finance. Working capital basically is what it is, except in the project world. And the other thing is you have milestone payments. So you, as you have your contract with your client or the main contractor or whichever counterparty you're working with on a project, you negotiate a system of milestone payments. So as you reach certain milestones, for instance, you might be supplying a pump, or laying the foundation, or doing some part of it, but there is certain milestones along the path to completing your portion of the task. And as you attain each of these milestones, which could be verified by having inspectors, client representatives, or any kind of contractual mechanism, you get paid. So you get funded through these years that you've been involved. And you also have banks that guarantee you money against your contract. I mean, if you have a contract with ExxonMobil, you're probably going to find more banks who and if you have a track record of executing this kind of work, you obviously already have a relationship with someone who's going to lend you money, for your project. And plus, you want to have your milestone payments to be more than the cost that you incur up to that point, right? So that's kind of how the game works with EPC projects.
Thanks, Ananth. James, yeah. Mark, again, thanks. Any last words? And I'll say we're looking forward to see you guys more in the baseline community. There's a lot of companies here, big ones like Accenture and Ernst & Young that can help you out with your baseline journey. Also, companies like Envision, smaller, but Andreas and I have been working on a project with them. Very impressed with their work. Good project management and excellent math-oriented developers.
Yep.
So there's some really good companies to work with here as you go on that. Any last words before we move on?
Yeah, just to say that James and I are working on putting the whole protocol we have on chain. So that's one of the big projects at the moment. Writing the white paper about how we're gonna have all the invoices on non-fungible tokens to be sold on chain. Basically, it's coming.
Very cool.
And also, thank you, John, for having us on the show. It's been great. We'd love to come back one day, and great to meet everyone as well.
Well, we hope to see
Really
you on the
awesome to
regular
have you.
baseline
Yeah.
sessions as well.
That'd be awesome.
And we could use some developers in the core devs community. So send your up and comers that trying to make a name for themselves. I don't hire anybody unless I see some open source work for them. So,
Love that.
Samrat, I know as co-chair, I know you've been listening in. I don't think the folks on YouTube can see you because but that's cool. I want to say quickly, we're going to be off next week. It is a U.S. holiday or pretty close to one. And we're going to be using that time to get ready for, well, first we're going to be doing the holiday here in the U.S., but we're also going to be getting ready for the 8th of December. It's going to be a set of announcements that'll be coming out of the baselining. We're going to make that kind of a special day. So that'll be a special baseline show on the 8th, noon U.S. Eastern, as normal. And quick plug for Samrat. Samrat, are you going to be on the show live this Saturday?
Yeah, this Saturday, and I'd love to have James and Mark, if you guys could join us in the baseline show India as well. Although if you're in the Eastern time zone, let me give you a fair disclaimer: you're going to wake up very early on a Saturday.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would. The baseline show is going on this weekend, 8:30 U.S. Eastern in the morning on Saturday. 6 o'clock, is that right? Samrat?
Well,
India time?
6 o'clock. 6 o'clock India time, and now with the adjusted time, it's 7:30 in the morning for you guys.
Ooh.
Oh, hell no.
And
I shouldn't say that. I mean, I've made you get up in all hours of the night, and day. All right, so that is another baseline show in the can. We never fail here, but yeah, next week we will be off. And thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week in the baseline show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys. Bye.